All right, school is in session. So take your seats and turn up the volume. It's time for the smartest fishing show on the internet. This is the show that dives into everything fishing, from tactics and gear to policy and product. Here he is, the fishing professor, Professor Sid Dobrin. So stick around, you might learn something.
I bet you're going fishing all of the time. Baby going fishing too. Bet your life your sweet wife is gonna catch more fish than you. Many fish bites if you got good bait. Oh, here's a little tip that I would like to relate. With my pole, baby, and my line, I'm a going fishing. Yes, I'm going fishing, and my baby going fishing too. All right, welcome to the Inventive Fishing Professor Show. I am Sid Dobrin, the Fishing Professor, and I am so damn glad you have tuned into the Fishing Professor Show today, because we have got Eric Bachnik of MirrOLure in the Inshore Offshore Digital Studio today. MirrOLure, of course, is that iconic lure manufacturer that caters to inshore fishing. And we're going to talk lures and fishing with Mr. Bachnik in order to get some real pro info. We'll also be pouring a few fingers of Bulleit Bourbon in today's Bourbon Break, and we'll be counting down the Fishing Professor's top 10 inshore search baits. Hey, just a quick reminder before we get the throttle down that the Inventive Fishing Show is owned and operated by Inventive Fishing LLC, but we are not sponsored by anyone, so everything we convey on the show comes from the heart, not from corporate influence. Of course, we are always open to being influenced by the corporation, by the man, by sponsorship and bribery. So don't hear our independence as a statement of resistance against capital influence, but as a condition of the moment, which we hope to overcome as our listening crew expands. So spread the word about the Fishing Professor Show, and someone maybe in the industry might take note of all the good times we're having here on the show. So start sharing our links with your network as you listen. And so, if you ever need it and you want to make a comment or leave a question about anything on the show, feel free to email me at sid@inventivefishing.com. So let's make like Marvin Gaye and let's get it on. All right. Well, we have got a true angling aficionado in the Inshore Offshore Digital Studio today. We are fortunate to have Eric Bachnik, owner of L&S Bait Company, the parent company for the iconic MirrOLure line of lures, as well as Island Lures, which makes some remarkable trolling lures, which you've probably heard me talk about in several of the Fishing Professor's top 10 lists. L&S also distributes Tidal Surge Lures, a Texas-based company that produces some really unique soft bodies like the Manic Mullet and the Crazy Croaker, both of which I've reviewed on the Inventive Fishing web pages and the Inventive Fishing YouTube channel. They also make the Tidal Surge Split Tail Mullet, which is a great soft body. And of course, L&S is parent to the classic Paul Brown lures. I hear myself using words like iconic and classic when talking about MirrOLures and the other L&S brands, and I realize those really are the kinds of descriptors that MirrOLure deserves, given their long-held reputation among anglers. Now, I don't know if it's more accurate to describe Eric Bachnik as a savvy lure manufacturer who also fishes, or to describe him as a fanatic angler who happens to make some of the most iconic inshore lures on the market. Either way, I'm thrilled to have Eric Bachnik in the Inshore Offshore Digital Studio today. Eric, thanks so much for taking the time to be here. It's great to see you.
Sid, thank you so much for having me. And I just love fishing and love talking about, the company and what my grandfather has built over the many years that he drove L&S Bait Company forward.
Well, that's a great intro into this, because the first thing I wanted to get you to talk about is I love origin stories, and I know a little bit about the L&S origin story and the Harold Lemaster being a carpenter who would whittle lures. But give us the details. Give us that origin story.
Okay. Yeah, he was a carpenter by trade. Back in Kankakee, Illinois. Obviously, they had a lot of freshwater species on the Kankakee River, and he just got the idea of, hey, I'm a fisherman, and let's start designing some wooden baits. And he would do that probably those long winters up there in Kankakee. And then in the springtime, when ice broke, he would bring those to the river and, test them out, if you will. So it's ironic that we sort of got our freshwater start back in Kankakee, Illinois, and he really revved up the freshwater product line. He had the popular Panfish Master, which was more of a panfish bait, the popular Bass Master, the Pike Master, the Muskie Master. So he made all these different different sizes lures, and those were pretty much broken backs, 2-body piece construction. So he was doing quite well on the freshwater scene, and then he moved to Florida, still selling lots of freshwater baits, and then started designing saltwater baits, and that's sort of where we're seen right now as a saltwater lure manufacturer. So it's sort of, there's some irony there that we got our roots in the freshwater market. However, right now, we're basically 100% saltwater with the product lines that we offer the market.
If I remember correctly, I've heard you talk about that he lived over on the Alafaya, and that the way the name MirrOLure came into play was that he had seen someone fishing with a lure that was very reflective, and he liked the idea of building that reflective body. Is that an accurate reason?
That is true, and it's I don't know where he really got the idea. I certainly would have, didn't think about asking those questions when I was a teenager, or even younger than that. I just knew him as the guy, my grandfather that made fishing lures. But boy, I would have liked to really ask him those questions. But yeah, there was quite a few. There was several lures that the Cisco Kid was built in this area as well. And the Cisco Kid was one also that put the insert inside the bait. So I'm not sure whether we got the idea from Cisco Kid or whether Cisco Kid got it from us. I don't really know, but that's where the name Mirror Lure came from, as the mirror image that we put inside the lure. Mm-hmm.
Hey, I remember reading a while back, and I mean a while back, like 20 years ago, that even back then, MirrOLure was turning out lures at a rate of about 1 every 12 seconds. Comparatively, how many more are you producing now? And I know you're not going to.
I'll tell you, we've certainly been blessed over the last couple of years with a lot of new anglers in fishing, and we definitely saw some spike in sales. It's certainly slowed down now, but we did ramp up. We almost doubled our production during the pandemic, and it was great to try to catch up. It's normally in our industry we don't see those big spikes like the shooting sports do. We just are pretty flat, so it was nice to have something, either way, go sort of help our sales, and I hate to say capitalize on the pandemic, but it was one of those things that really helped our business, flourish.
Yeah, so you're sort of anticipating a couple of other things I wanted to ask you about. And, everybody in the industry has seen that surge in numbers of people taking up fishing for the first time. And one of the things we've seen in the industry, particularly, is a lot of new mothers taking up saltwater fishing. And I heard you talk about how important it was for you that your father introduced you and your brother Frank to fishing, and that as a father of daughters, you've been very attentive to teaching them to fish as well. Could you talk about the importance of both family traditions of teaching fishing and also the importance of bringing more women into the sport?
Oh, absolutely. One great thing about the boat, going out on the boat, and fishing, is all barriers are down. You're there enjoying the scenery, you're watching the wildlife, you're casting, and it seems like, there's no barriers. So you can approach, most situations, and it's just a great time. It's hard to fish with a cell phone, in your hand, but I'm sure there's someone that can do that. But anyways, so that's really important, and having 2 daughters, and they especially females, they listen so well, they really do. So you find that they catch on pretty quickly, and their skill level, I think, advances a little faster than a lot of males. Boy, it's great to, and it's one of those sports where, you're not hitting from the forward tee when golf, you're in the boat, and everything is equal, if you will, and, certainly there's some luck factor there. Skill level helps, at definitely catching more fish, but overall, it's just a great environment to bring the whole family activity of fishing, and I'm just so happy to have gotten my family involved and have had a grandfather and father that introduced me both to fishing and hunting, and just fantastic.
Fantastic. Yes. So, the lure industry is an interesting industry to keep an eye on, particularly when you look at how lure manufacturers from other countries bring their lures into the U.S. But I read somewhere that MirrOLure also exports a significant number of lures each year. How important has the international market been to MirrOLure, and what are some of the other countries where MirrOLures are popular?
Well, we do export a lot into the island countries. Down in the Caribbean, they use a lot of hard baits there. Where we specifically sell a lot of lures abroad is our island lure market. I think there's 86 different countries that we send island lures, South Africa being a huge market for us. Anywhere where there's blue water trolling, we typically have a market there for it, for making everything from dolphin lures all the way to marlin lures. So that's sort of nice. That's not the largest portion of our business, but it's nice. Maybe 10% of our island lure business is sent abroad, so that's nice, and we're just blessed to have found that. And with MirrOLure again, South America uses quite a bit of our stuff, and South Africa as well. So
that's really interesting. I've talked about island lures. I do, on the show, we do the top 10, and I've had several island lures featured in top 10 dolphin lures, top 10 wahoo lures, and those kinds of things. And so the island lure line is really great. It's also interesting because I assume, based on the way that MirrOLure promotes its products, that in the U.S., your primary market is Southeast, say from Texas up and around through the Chesapeake Bay, maybe a little further up the East Coast into the bluefish and striper territory, but not too far north, and certainly more southern U.S. and East Coast U.S. than West Coast. Is that an accurate assumption of where your lures are being picked up?
It really is. We acquired drone spoons a little over 2 years ago. We actually went up there in January of when the pandemic first started in our country. So we were back moving drone back to Florida here when this all started with COVID. But so that has given us a little bit greater exposure north of the Chesapeake. The drone spoon is used, with striper, bluefish, and even Spanish mackerel. I didn't realize how much Spanish mackerel fishing is done in the Chesapeake. It's a short window, given mainly July and August, but it's, a lot of folks like to go out there and do some trolling. So that sort of enabled us, to expand our market a little bit. But typically it's, like you said, Brownsville to Chesapeake. And another good thing, since we're selling saltwater product lines, our customers, our distributors that we sell, carry all our product lines. So that's sort of nice. We typically have the same buyer, and so we can approach them and sell them all of our product lines. So that works out really well.
Really glad to hear that drone is under your aegis now. I love drone spoons, and you mentioned them for mackerel. I think they're the best kingfish lure out there. I also think they're, particularly when you're working them on a planer, probably one of the top blackfin tuna lures available. I absolutely love trolling drones for blackfin tuna.
Well, that's good to know, Sid. The 3.5 is an iconic lure. We actually used it back in the 80s and 90s, like you said, trolling on a number 3 planer for king mackerel and grouper, just eat it up in Tampa Bay. So we were really happy to get it from Lev Huntington, and we've really done a great job. And that's another company that we do a lot of exporting, because that spoon, it's got a good mustad hook on it. It's really strong, and they catch some really big fish on them for sure.
They are great, just great. And particularly with the color options on the backside, those are just, phenomenal spoons. So let me shift just a little bit here, but back in the late 1990s, early 2000s, so right around the millennial shift, you were talking about trends in the lure industry. And at the time, you noted there was an upswing in topwater fishing. And I think in about 1998, you introduced the Top Dog lure line, a line that now includes Top Dog Junior, Top Pup, She Dog, She Pup, and the Papa Dog, all of which have become staples for inshore topwater anglers. What is it about topwater inshore fishing that draws so many to those kinds of fishing experiences?
Wow, it's just so exciting, Sid, as you well know, to be casting a topwater lure and seeing that explosion. Sometimes you can read how large the fish is. Sometimes they fool you with a little sipping of the top water, and you catch the fish. It's like, wow, that fish was an accurate feeder. But yeah, Top Dog was really one of those lures that really we drove out of the park, and it's hard, a lot of companies come out with new products, and they have maybe a short run. Certainly they all work, but to get one to stick and be one that you can branch off and make different sizes. We often said at that particular era, we were going to dog people to death with Top Dog, She Dog, Top Pup, Top Dog Junior, so it seems like, we get on a roll with something, it's good to have different sizes. And then we came out with a Catch 2000, and we saw the trend. The trend was always there with top water, but especially right around that 90s craze. There was a lot of topwater fishing, as you noted there. Then, suspending twitch baits really got to be really popular. That's when we came out with a Catch 2000, and that was another one we hit out of the park. It's it's not, the bait looks okay. It's not that impressive. It's got big eyes. It's got the mullet profile that doesn't have a lot of action, but it catches a lot of fish, and it's still in our product line today, and it's known as a big trout bait. So I guess from topwater came suspending, and I think we've been in the suspending category. That's been our most popular category since, I'd say early 2000s.
So we were just talking about the increase in the numbers of new anglers that have started fishing throughout the pandemic. And speaking of topwaters, I've seen the MirrOLure prop bait marketed as the perfect beginner topwater. What is it about that particular lure that makes it such a great beginner bait for those learning topwater fishing?
That's a really, really, real good question. So the Miro prop it's a 2 treble hook bait, and you simply just cast it out. And if you can reel it, stop it, reel it, stop it. Obviously a cadence with a twitch, pause, and any angler can do that. So I always tell, if you're new to artificial fishing, fish something that's very user friendly and easy to work. Probably the one that I would say the training wheels, if you will, of artificial lures would be a small little lead head and a paddle tail. Simply cast it out, and if you can reel it in, and it'll work. It'll catch fish. Then you get into hard baits, and it's hard to beat a MirrOLure. They're so user friendly. You simply cast it out there. You can reel it back in. You can twitch it. And then when you go to top water, the surface walker is one of the hardest lures in all artificial lures to sort of learn. So you start with the prop bait, and then you can graduate to the surface walker, which is my favorite topwater, because you can cover a tremendous amount of ground, and it's just fun to fish, to see those explosions. And boy, you sort of getting excited right now. I haven't been throwing a topwater yet this spring, and I might have to do that this weekend.
Jealous. I want to do that too. I think I'm going to surf cast this weekend though. So you mentioned the MirrOLure, and I got to tell you, one of the things I've been eager to ask you, and in fact, I will admit I was too embarrassed to ask you this the last time we spoke at ICAST, but I've always wondered if it was MirrOLure or MirrODine, because I hear it both ways. So I'm glad to get the definitive correct pronunciation now on MirrODine. I've heard several inshore tournament anglers say that the MirrODine is flat out the best inshore lure out there. And I got to add that I particularly love the MirrODine skin series, especially the pilchard and the pinfish patterns. So how did the development of the MirrODine contribute to your response to the trends that you observe?
Well, obviously, a shad profile or a pilchard profile. We call them whitebait over here in the Tampa Bay region. It's that wider body profile. Now, my grandfather Harold, he did have a sort of a shad body. It was the Glad shad, which is a 32M. He also had the 47, which was the larger version there. So he also built some lures, but they were really pretty fast sinkers. They were sinking twitch bait. So we basically said, hey, we know the suspending category is quite popular. We got to build a pilchard or a shad body in that particular suspending twitch bait, and that's what we did in 2006. And boy, it was another one. We were pretty hot there for 10 years, and that one definitely pays the bills around L&S Bait Company. And like you mentioned, the new Skin series, which is just a natural bait pattern on top of the actually we are going to have another size, but anyways, it just worked out fantastic to have that natural bait fish presentation in the MirrOLure family.
How would you coach anglers to fish the MirrOLure?
Well, depending on, first you got two choices. You either go with the MirrOLure or the heavy Dean. If you're fishing in a lot of current and you want to get the lure to go down, say 3 to 5 feet of water you're fishing and there's heavy current, I would select the heavy Dean that sinks at about a foot per second. The MirrOLure is iconic in 1 to 3 feet of water, not a lot of current, and you fish them the same way. I like to cast it out, and I like to twitch, pause, twitch, pause. That's the way I like to fish it. But there are other folks that have a tremendous amount of success fishing it differently. Maybe a twitch, pause. So, everybody will develop their own systematic way of working it. And if you're catching fish, you're probably going to mimic that same retrieve again, I'm guessing. So it is, I think the MirrOLure is so successful because it was a lot easier than the 52, which are sinking plug that we came out with in the 50s and 60s. It's simply easier to fish.
That's fantastic. One of the things I love about the MirrOLure is I tend to think of it as a primary search bait too, that when I'm not sight fishing, I'm still looking for the fish. The MirrOLure is a great search bait.
It sure is.
All right. So you mentioned the 52. So I've got a quick story for you.
Okay.
So when I was a kid, and I mean a little kid, like 4 or 5 years old, my addiction to fishing had emerged in full blossom. One day I'm walking on the beach with my family and I find an old MirrOLure 52M washed up on the beach. And this is the classic among classics of MirrOLures. And the hooks were rusted and broken. The classic red head and white body pattern was chipped a little, but not too much. And the lure had clearly been in the water for a long time. I took it home and I put it in my tackle box. Now, about 10 years later, as a young teenager, when I was starting to fish solo a lot, I put 2 new hooks on it and decided to fish with it. And I am not making this up, but on my first cast with it, wham, I catch a 15-inch trout. Not a monster gator trout, but that recycled MirrOLure proved its effectiveness even as old as it was. True story. Now,
that is such a great story.
The 52M series has been around, and you just mentioned the 50 is around for a long time, and it remains one of the best trout lures available. What is it about that design, that simplicity of design, that leads it to its effectiveness?
It's crazy. The 52 and the TT, we sell them, back in the 50s and 60s, everything you caught, you kept and ate. That's just the way it was. So I think that's why Grandpa Harold put 3 hooks on many of the lures back in that era. That's my feelings. So, but he was so meticulous in the design of his products. The 52M and the TT, if you were to grab those lures, throw them in your pool, they actually will stand up on the hooks. That's how well balanced that plug is. And to this day, we still sell, hundreds of thousands of them. I mean, people really like to throw them in the surf, in cold water conditions where there may be, fishing 6 feet of water, 5 feet of water, 7 feet of water. It sinks at a foot per second. So you can count the lure down. And it's a bait that you can basically reel in barely bumps. It's used in, again, cold water conditions, and it catches fish. And even in Texas, Sid, they use it in their beach fishing because it's heavy enough where they can get long distance throwing their bait casters. And we sell a lot of 51s, TTs, and 52s for surf fishermen, and that's pretty much May and June in Texas area.
So when you teach people how to fish the 52, what are the key pointers you give them?
I say slow down and do nothing, basically reel it and give it a bump every now and then, reel it, maybe I would say a foot and a half, give it a small little bump. If you twitch if you twitch your rod tip too hard, the lure will foul. That's one thing. If you see that front hook coming up, riding up, grabbing the monofilament or your leader material of choice, you're overworking that bait. A slight little rod tip will cause that lure to actually roll. That's where you get the flash from on the 52, the 50, on the TT, TTR, STTR, all the sinking twitch baits that we offer.
Excellent. So let's shift away from MirrOLure per se, and let's talk about the Paul Brown series.
Okay.
Certainly the Paul Brown original has earned a reputation among inshore anglers, but so have the newer soft Dean, I think we're going to go with now, right?
That's true. Yeah.
And the soft dog. And I'm particularly interested in the soft dog, which is a kind of walk the dog mullet imitator that has a similar design to a few hard body topwaters on the market, but it uses that soft material instead of a hard plastic. What's the thought behind that design?
Well, obviously the thought process is, when he comes up and slaps at it, it's a softer product. Through our testing, we did really well fishing that bait, and it was just one of those things that we wanted to be one of the first on the market to have a soft surface bait, and it just fits so well in that Paul Brown category. So obviously soft bait, soft presentation, he comes up for it, possibility of him coming back if he misses it, which you do miss a lot of fish. The soft dog casts extremely well at an ounce. It works really well, easy to walk. However, it's best in calmer situations since it sits a little lower in the water, Sid. But and we sell some of them. Some of the guys that have tried them have really liked them and continue to use them. But it's one of those lures in the Paul Brown lineup that probably doesn't get the recognition that it so deserves. Our Fat Boy is so popular, like you mentioned, the original, and the Softine XL. Those are the core. But we do have some new baits that we're going to roll up. We actually made some changes to our Tidal Surge Maniac Mullet and Crazy Croaker, so we're going to roll them under the Paul Brown lineup. So I think you'll see that here at ICAST.
Excellent. I love those two lures. When I reviewed them, I had so much fun fishing them. The action on those things are incredible. You also brought back Paul Brown Corky, which I think is one of the most perpetually sold out lures I've ever encountered because they're so popular. What is it about the Corky that makes it so popular among inshore anglers?
Well, we can't use the name Corky. That's owned by another lure company in the industry. So that's why we sort of renamed it Paul Brown Lures. So, but it was one of those perfect situations for a manufacturer. Paul Brown and his wife were making them in their garage, and they just couldn't keep up with supply. So the first year, we were able to just make probably 4 times the amount or 5 times the amount that he did out of his garage. And we were able to supply. But it's interesting, Sid, because when, the majority of the sales were always in Texas. I was doing a show in North Carolina, and this guy walked up to me. He says, "I'd like to see the Paul Browns." I said, "Here we are in North Carolina. How do you know about Paul Brown lures?" He said, all he said to me was an older gentleman. He says, "I'm a trout fisherman, son." And that, that pretty much shows it that, if you're a serious trout fisherman, you're aware of the products that are being used. And now, obviously, with the internet and great shows like like you have, the word gets out. And, thank goodness, because now we're selling more Paul Browns in Florida and North Carolina than we ever have. So we just have been so fortunate.
Yeah, I had, in fact, the first time I had heard about it were from some friends in Texas that were fishing it. And I thought this would make a great lure in the Pamlico Sound in North Carolina as well. So, yeah, that movement is fantastic across the country like that. I got to admit, I probably need to add one to my review list and get some video of them in action for the review pages on Inventive Fishing. But that's something I'll have to do this spring. All right, so I'm going to jump back for a minute before I get back to actual fishing. And I want to get you to talk about conservation for a minute. And I've heard you talk about seeing the big picture when it comes to conservation, both on Captain Chris's The Speckled Truth podcast and on Captain C.A. Richardson Flat Glass podcast. So I know that you have a dedication to fisheries and fishery habitat conservation. Could you talk about your thoughts on conservation?
Sure. The topic of clean water in Florida is so important, and there's some great initiatives right now, moving towards that. And I think folks need to be aware of that. Bass fishermen do a great job. They'll go out and catch lots of bass. At the end of the day, they'll either release everything or or weigh them and then release them. But in saltwater, we got to recognize it's not an endless supply. I love to eat fish, and I'll definitely take, definitely some fish home. But I think we got to recognize that it's okay to let those big breeders go, the trout over 20 inches. I mean, that's just a great initiative to just let them go, let somebody else catch them and let them do their thing in nature, and we've been hit hard on the west coast of Florida here. Our trout, we had some bad red tides, and our trout fishery really took a suffering. So you go through that, and I didn't trout fish for like 2.5 years because I didn't want to put any pressure on the fish. And fortunately, we've got other species that we can fish for. But in Mother Nature's resilient, they're definitely coming back. But it made me recognize even more that, it's okay to take a few fish, but those big ones, let's return them to nature and let them do their things. And that's the same way with redfish, snook, and trout, our big three in Florida, so those are my feelings.
That's really great. It's really important stuff. And I'm always inspired to see industry leaders like yourself promoting that kind of conservation thinking. So let me give you another quick story. Recently, I was talking with Jim Hendricks of Saltwater Sportsman. I believe you know Jim.
Oh, yeah.
And we were chatting, and I asked Jim about his favorite places to fish, and he mentioned Charlotte Harbor. And he started to tell me a story about fishing with you and your twin brother, Frank, who guides out of Boca Grande. And you all were wading along the islands down there, casting whitebait for snook about 25 years ago. Mm-hmm. And he was talking about wading and dragging a bait net behind him when he felt something tugging at the bait net, only to turn around and find a nurse shark chewing on his bait net. Now, when he told me this story, I kind of froze and I said, "Hey, Jim, if you'll recall when that happened, you were at a bear advertising media trip sponsored by Suzuki and Penn, and I was standing right there with you. We had completely forgotten that we had all met way back then and that we were fishing with you and your brother."
Yeah.
So first I have to ask you, do you remember that? And second, I have a vague memory that your boat was a custom built hull that had an incredibly wide beam. Am I remembering that correctly?
Yeah, you're remembering that. So that goes way back. That's when really, it was excellent fishing right there. And my brother was really good at putting us on some good quality fish. And it was all about, getting some good photo fish for Suzuki and Penn, and we had some good times. I remember those trips, and boy, we did catch some nice fish. I remember that. And I remember the shark issue. And I think we, even Frank said, well, he won't bother you, just keep fishing, it was something like that. And it was like Jim's eyes were like as wide as saucers, I think let's go back in the boat. What about this waiting thing? But yeah, those are great times. And I remember that had to be in the early 90s there. And we were fishing the Pine Island Sound with my brother. And the boat was an old Tremblay. It was a mullet hull from Chiefland that my brother put together. And we were using that. And I think we had a couple chase boats there as well. But I remember that trip, and it was a lot of fun.
What was the logic on such a wide beam for an inshore boat?
Well, I think it was able to run shallow. Most of the Tremblay was a well boat, had the motor up front typically, but Frank put 200 in the back. It originally had, I think, 200 Mercury on it. And so it's big and wide. It got up on a plane real fast, but I don't know if you remember this. I don't know if it was rough or calm. I think it was pretty calm, so we didn't get beat up, but it was like riding a door. It would certainly beat you up. So now he's driving a different boat here. He just bought a new 25 Avenger, and he said he's going to name that one Last Office. It's the last boat that he's going to buy before he retires, he said. So anyways, good times.
I'll have to come back down and get with him before he retires and get on the water with you.
That would be fun. It's going to be quite a few years before he retires, but anyways, we definitely need to get a trip together on that, Sid.
That would be fantastic. I'd love to film with you guys again. I was tempted to ask you about your 2006 season with the FLW Redfish series, but I think you fished one event with the one top 10 finish, and you don't do a lot of competitive fishing though, do you?
No, it was a lot of fun. I do enjoy it. I fish a little. My teenage daughter, well, she's not a teenager anymore. She's 21, but Shelby and I fish the Bay Area Bassmasters with Tom Mahoney. So we do a little competitive fishing, but we're not so competitive in freshwater. I think it was some irony there where my daughter said, "Hey, Dad, let's go freshwater fishing." And I said, "Okay, let's go freshwater fishing." And we've had a lot of fun with it, and we look forward to fishing those little things. But I fished a few tournaments, and it was just one of those things when I was on the water. Now I'm not on the water, very much anymore. I've got to be here at the office, moving product out the door. So it was fun.
So let's go back to the idea that there are so many new anglers trying fishing for the first time. So right now, if you were going to hand a new angler a box of MirrOLures to use for the first time, what would you put in that box?
How many items in the box, Sid?
Oh, let's go with like a Plano box and we'll put 6 to 10 in there.
Okay, let's make it easy. Let's do 4.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah.
No, 4 or 5. That'll be fine. The paddle tail, a small little paddle tail, our Marshman Junior with a quarter-ounce head. Quarter-ounce head seems like it's a lot, but it allows a new angler to be able to cast a long ways. Great casting distance makes a key, especially here on the West Coast where there's a lot of pressure. You want to cast far, you'll catch more fish, period. With that paddle tail, you just throw it out there, reel it back. I'd also have the MirrODine. We talked about the MirrODine, how effective that is in shallow situations. Probably the Heavy Dean that allow you to fish those areas a little deeper water, the same size, as the MirrODine. And then it would be probably our Little John tail. Our Little John tail, it looks like nothing. It's a twitch bait. It's a soft plastic, again, on a quarter-ounce head. And I think with those 4 baits right there, you can catch, I know for a fact you can catch anything in that Brownsville to, Chesapeake Bay markets. So just 4 of those baits right there. As far as colors go, soft baits, I like dark colors like avocado, golden brim. I do like a pearl, which is not a dark color, but pearl in that little paddle tail is hard to beat in clear water. It really is. And then as far as the hard baits go, I like natural colors like our Skin series or greenback color, green with a pearl belly, black with a pearl belly, natural colors in the hard baits. If I get in stained water conditions, go with a little bit of brightness, go with a chartreuse, go with an orange, the 808, the Halloween or 808 color is always good. It also offers a gold scale insert inside the bait, and that seems to work really well in dark conditions. So those would be the top 4 that I would choose as my personal favorites, as well as somebody new to fishing.
Excellent. So I know it's always a chancy thing to ask about a lure manufacturer's competition, but I was curious as to whether you ever fish with any of your competitors' lures, not necessarily to see how they work and what the competition is up to, but because you like fishing with them.
You know what? I know the competition. I can know the competition pretty well, and it keeps you on your toes. These companies are really, really good. I mean, Zuri is fantastic, makes great products. So does Rapala. I mean, Rapala, they're worldwide. When they come out with a bait, it's well done. Strike King crankbaits, we use a lot of those in freshwater. I don't know how they get those to swim true. Every one of them that I've ever picked up swims true. So I know about the competition, and it keeps us on our toes.
Excellent. So one final question. This is the question that I ask every guest on the Fishing Professor show. You have a reputation as an inshore specialist, and the numbers of trout, red, snook, flounder, and such that you've caught are probably innumerable. But what's your grail fish? What's the one fish on your bucket list, the fish that you really want to catch one day?
Oh, wow. I never thought I was going to catch a blue marlin, and I was fortunate to be visiting our sister factory in Costa Rica, and we went, offshore, and I caught a small blue marlin. I never thought I was going to catch that. So to answer that, I'd probably like to catch a payara, which I'm sure you know what they are. They got the big teeth. It looks like such an intimidating fish. They're supposed to be really strong. Also the golden dorado. I would love to catch one of those, and I think those are Argentina fish. But that payara has got those teeth, and I've seen them cut through some of our heavy plastic big diving lures. I've seen them punch holes, and those wall thicknesses are like 1/4 ounce. I'm thinking the jaw, that and the teeth, how sharp they are. I'd love to catch one of those.
Oh, that's absolutely fantastic. Eric, I can't thank you enough for being on the show. I know that this is a conversation I'm going to remember every time I'm casting a MirrOLure, and really, really grateful for you taking the time to talk with us today.
Hey, thank you for having me. I love listening to the stories, and it's iconic. I love what I do. I'm so fortunate that my grandfather built this legacy, and we'll try to keep things rolling along the tracks.
Sounds great. Thanks, Eric. That's Eric Bachnik with MirrOLures. Okay, it is time for this week's top 10 list. And this week, I want to look at a kind of generic category of inshore lures and take a look at my top 10 favorite search baits. But before we get into the top 10 lures themselves, I think it's important to give a little background about search baits, because it really is truly a generic term and maybe even an ambiguous term. The idea of search baits comes to us through bass fishing and anglers fishing in unknown waters. The idea of a search bait, just like the name implies, is to locate fish, not to cast to where the fish already are. And a lot of our fishing time is spent trying to find fish, and search baits are the lures you would cast in your search. So for this top 10, I'm going to look at the top 10 lures I use inshore when trying to find fish. Now, of course, when you're fishing, where you're fishing and what kinds of fish populate that region, or even the kind of water you're fishing, like the flats versus canals, and what kinds of fish you're looking for certainly affect what kinds of search baits you'll want to use. That being the case, it might be easier to simply list 10 kinds of lures rather than specific lures. For example, I could easily say the top 10 search baits are bucktail spoons, crankbaits, lip plugs, poppers, twitch baits, plastic jerk baits, shrimp baits, and topwater plugs. But that really doesn't tell you much of anything, because that's basically every kind of lure there is. That's like when my students at UF ask me, "Professor Dobrin, what should I read?" And I respond with books. Not very helpful, not very professional. Of course, the problem with answering a question like what should I read or what search bait should I use is that no matter what I tell you, there's a good chance you're going to end up not seeing the value in the book or the lure that I did or in the way that I did it. In fact, when I train new writing teachers, I always tell them not to teach the books they love the most, because inevitably their students won't love the books or connect with the books in the same way they did when they fell in love with the book. And that can be really disappointing as a teacher. Same thing is true when recommending something as ambiguous as a search bait. The difference is that students really ought to listen to their teachers, and you really ought to trust me on these search baits, even though this is an eclectic list of lures of various types and purposes. So let's get rolling on this week's top 10 list of the Fishing Professor's top 10 books you should read. Wait, nope, sorry, wrong list. It's my top 10 search bait list. Let's kick it off with a reliable all-purpose multi-species lure, the Bomber saltwater grade mullet. I like this lure as a search bait because it's a slow sinking twitch bait. I like its fall rate as it doesn't just drop to the bottom, which is important in order to keep the bait up off the bottom while covering a good portion of the water column. This is one of those versatile design baits, too, that attracts all kinds of inshore species, ranging from stripers and bluefish to trout, redfish, snook, jacks, flounders, tarpon, and so on. I've even had inshore snapper and grouper pound the bomber's saltwater grade mullet. It's just the right size, 3.5 inches long and weighing 5/8 of an ounce. Great for casting and for being in the prey size range for just about all inshore game fish. It comes in 7 color patterns, but I tend to fish the silver mullet and the redhead flash. I have to give credit too to Bomber for rigging the saltwater grade mullet with saltwater grade hardware. The number 2 treble hooks are corrosion resistant and really rugged. At number 9, I'm going to go with Spro's white bucktail. Now, again, it would be easy for me just to say a white bucktail, which would be accurate, and bucktails make ideal search baits. But I'm going to specifically identify the Spro white bucktail because of the head shape and the position of the rigging eye on the head. The eye position on the Spro white bucktail keeps the bucktail in parallel position, and the hydrodynamic shape of the head keeps the whole lure gliding through the water. I also like that you can get this same motion in all size of the lures, ranging from the 1/4 ounce size up to the 8-ounce size. Of course, the size you want will depend on the rod and reel you're using and the depth and the current of the water you're fishing. For inshore search patterns, I generally like to throw the Spro bucktail in the 1/2 to 1.5 ounce sizes. And yes, the Spro bucktail jig comes in a high voltage rainbow of colors, but when it comes to using bucktail jigs as search baits, I am a traditionalist and I like to stick with the all white pattern. Okay, at number 8, I'm going to go with the Acme Castmaster spoon, but I want to emphasize that for a search bait, I like to go with the version that comes with a bucktail teaser, both the treble hook version and the single hook version. As great of an all-purpose lure that the Castmaster spoon is, I just fish the bucktail teaser to add another layer of enticement to the lure. And when you're searching for fish, the more attractors you can have on the lure, the better. Unlike a lot of spoons out there, the Castmaster is designed with distance casting in mind. I also like its tight flutter retrieve. It's also one of the most corrosive resistant spoons out there, so I like being able to use them over and over and over for many years. I also like that the hooks on the Castmaster are affixed to the lure by way of a split ring, which allows me to switch out hooks should they be bent or worn down. I should note too that the Castmaster spoon with bucktail teaser comes in 3 color variations, all chrome, a golden yellow, and a chrome and blue. I use all 3 of these and find them to be equally great search baits. All right, at number 7, I'm going to go with Live Target's Pinfish Swim Bait. Now, this is a lure that I've reviewed before and that has appeared on other top 10 lists. If you want to see my video gear review of the Live Target Pinfish Swim Bait, it's available at inventiveFishing.com and on the Inventive Fishing YouTube channel. The Live Target Pinfish Swim Bait is one of the best pinfish imitators out there, and I find it to be a great search bait. It comes in 2 sizes, a 3.5-inch, 3/4 ounce version, and a 4-inch, 1 ounce version. I prefer the smaller of the 2 when searching. It comes in 2 lifelike color options also. All of the Live Target swim baits are designed to swim like the fish that they imitate, and the enhanced oscillator tail on the swim baits really contributes to that lifelike pinfish swimming action. Part of why I like the Live Target Pinfish Swim Bait too is that heavy-duty inline hook it comes pre-rigged with. All right, at number 6, let's go to a classic, versatile, reliable lure that is a commonplace lure among inshore anglers, and that's DOA's Terrorize. The Terrorize really is a fundamental soft body lure for any inshore fishing scenario. The standout feature of the Terrorize is its oversized eye, which is part of the internal jig head. The reflective holographic eye does a great job of attracting a predator's attention. The internalized jig head helps keep the lure swimming and reduces the possibility of snags. The DOA Terrorize comes in 3 sizes, a tiny 2-inch version, a regular 2 3/4-inch version, and the big one at 4 inches. I rely on the regular size for searching. The Terrorize are available in about 50 color options, giving you lots of options for local conditions or your personal preference. At number 5, let's give Egret Baits Voodoo Mullet some serious credit. And yes, this is another lure that I reviewed, and you can check out that video gear review at inventivefishing.com or on the Inventive Fishing YouTube channel. And yes, this is one of my sillier reviews, but it's fun. It'll give you a bit more insight about the Voodoo Mullet. The Voodoo Mullet is a segmented swim bait with incredibly articulated swimming action. It's super rugged, made from a tough TPE plastic, and the segmented tail is strengthened with an internal mesh. It comes in two sizes, a 3.5-inch quarter-ounce version and a 4.5-inch 1-ounce version. As a search bait, I prefer the 3.5 version. It's available in 14 color variations, but as a search bait, I tend to use the Voodoo Mullet Gold Croaker pattern and the Voodoo Mullet Blue Herring pattern, though I also like the Striped Mullet pattern as well. And number 4, I'm going with another soft body lure with Bass Assassin's Salty Snack. This is a lure that gets used a lot when targeting speckled trout, but as far as soft body lures goes, its unique design and its reactive darting action make it a great search bait as well. You can get it with a weedless style worm hook that when rigged keeps the hook point inside the lure, making it both weedless and also really hydrodynamic. I fish it with a weighted weedless hook to give it a little bit of better sinking action, but the supplied hook you can rig it with without a hook, without a weight, keeping the lure in the water column or just below the surface. You can rig it with a drop weight to get it down while freeing its darting action. This is a 5-inch lure with great ribbed body design. Comes in a dozen color options, though I will tell you that I have fished the glow chartreuse tail with great success. At number 3, let's go to another all-time classic lure, the MirrOLure 52M. Now, when I say classic lure, what I mean is that this lure has been around for a while, and it has been around for a while because it is a consistent fish catcher. The MirrOLure 52M is a sinking twitch bait. It's got great darting action, rugged dual treble hooks, about 18 color variations, and the reputation of one of the best inshore lures ever to be produced. It measures 3 5/8 inches and weighs in at a ½ ounce. It's an ideal lure for searching in water 3 to 8 feet, and the triple treble hook rig pretty much ensures hookups even with the timidest of strikes. That would be the most timid of strikes. Way to go, English teacher. And that brings us to number 2, the runner-up, and I'm giving props to Fish Bites Dirty Boxer Curly Tails. These soft body lures come to us from Fish Bites, the company that created those great scented infused strips that revolutionized the scented bait industry. Using a really durable construction, Fish Bites has molded its infused material into a 5-inch curly tail soft body that pairs nicely with just about any jig head, wide gap worm hook, weedless hook, weighted hook, or other rigging option you might use with a curly tail. I like rigging them with a simple jig head. The soft body and phenomenal scent dispersal attracts fish and entices solid strikes. They come in 8 color patterns, but as a search bait, I prefer the high visibility, the counterpunch, and the white knuckle patterns. Seriously, if you're fishing inshore, you should keep a couple of bags of dirty boxers in your tackle. And yeah, I know that the dirty boxer theme with colors like white knuckle, counterpunch, tap out, knockout, and others is supposed to convey the toughness of a prize fighter. But I'm sorry for saying so, but every time I hear the name dirty boxer, all I can think about is my laundry hamper filled with my crusty old skivvies. Dirty boxers. And that brings us to my number 1 search bait. But as always, before we get to the big reveal, let's do a quick recap. At number 10, Bomber's Saltwater Grade Mullet. At number 9, Spro's White Bucktail. At number 8, Acme Castmaster Spoon, single hook with a bucktail trailer. At number 7, Live Targets Pinfish Swim Bait. At number 6, DOA's Terrorize. At number 5, Egret Bait's Voodoo Mullet. At 4, Saltwater Assassin's Salty Snack. At 3, MirrOLure's 52M, and focus on that red and white body. And number 2, Fish Bites Dirty Boxer Curly Tails. And that leaves us with my number 1 inshore search bait, which is bum-ba-da-bum. Wait for it. Unfair Lures Arrowhead. You'll hear me talk often about the great lures that Paul Van Reenen designs for Unfair Lures. And among those, I have to say that the Arrowhead is flat out an ideal search bait. Its unique design makes it a phenomenal distance casting lure, and its retrieval action is comparable to a walk the dog action, but underwater. It's more of a shallow water or just subsurface lure, and it runs best in depths between a foot and 3 feet down. I love that the Arrowhead rigging eye comes with a barrel swivel rather than a fixed place eye, letting the lure move more freely, and the swivel prevents spinning and line knotting. Of course, like most of the unfair lures, the Arrowhead has Unfair's patented 3D bleeding gills, which is a kind of marabou or flashabou that is built into the lure, giving the visual impression of an injured and bleeding fish. Unique too is the Arrowhead to the Arrowhead, unique too to the Arrowhead, as well as some other unfair lures, is the transverse barb style hooks. The Arrowhead measures in at 2.7 inches and weighs a half ounce. That makes it ideal for casting lines in the range of 8 to 20 pound class. They come in about 16 or so colors, and I'm a big fan of the pearl gold and the pearl chartreuse when searching. So those are my top 10 search baits. And as always, if you want to recommend another lure for me to take a look at, or that you think ought to be on my list or at least on my radar, please let me know. You can always drop me a line, when you're not wetting a line, at sid@inventivefishing.com. Please keep in mind, too, that the Fishing Professor Rodcast is not sponsored, so none of the products appear in my list with manufacturer influence. Of course, like any other patriotic American, I am more than willing to accept payment for preferential treatment of products under the guise of sponsorship, bribery, kickbacks, perks, and influence peddling. That's just the kind of guy I am, or the kind of guy I'd like to be. And as always, if you'd like the Fishing Professor's Top 10 about a particular fishing-related thing, just send me an email and I'll see about adding it to my list for future Top 10s. Thank you so much. That's the Top 10 list this week. Oh, it's Bourbon Break time, that time in the rodcast when we put down the rod and pick up the bottle for a little pouring instead of casting. So let me lure you in. In today's Bourbon Break, I want to talk a bit about a very popular bourbon, Bulleit Bourbon, which the folks at Bulleit market as a frontier whiskey. It's an interesting subtitle to the bourbon name, particularly given the popular origin story of this fashionable bourbon. So in the origin story, Tom Bulleit, who started distilling Bulleit Bourbon back in 1987, explains that his great-great-grandfather and tavern keeper Augustus Bulleit developed the recipe for Bulleit Bourbon back around 1830 and distilled it between 1830 and 1860. Now, if this is true, we're talking about a recipe that predates the American Civil War. But sometime in 1860, old Augustus Bulleit vanished while delivering his bourbon from his distillery in Louisville, Kentucky to New Orleans. So in 1987, Augustus's great-great-grandson Tom left his law practice and revitalized great-great-granddad's distilling practices. Of course, like other great bourbon stories, this one turns corporate when Seagram bought the Bulleit brand in 1997, and distribution across the U.S. kicked off in 1999. Eventually, though, Seagram's bought Bulleit, and then Kirin bought Seagram's, and Diageo bought Kirin. Now Kirin owns the Four Roses brand of bourbons, and it turns out that Bulleit outsources its bourbon, and for a while, Four Roses has been supplying Bulleit. So chances are when you're drinking Bulleit, you're really drinking a Four Roses derivative, and it's probably just not great-granddaddy's Augustus's pride and joy. Anyway, so Kirin buys the brand, and in 2017, they open a new Bulleit distillery in Shelbyville, Kentucky, further fueling the great Shelbyville-Springfield rivalry that is exemplified in the annual Pigskin Classic. And according to Simpsons Fandom Wikipedia, by the way, the Shelbyville motto is Springfield sucks. Sorry, off track. The non-Simpsons stuff is available online, so no real insider knowledge there, but back to the Bulleit. So Bulleit Bourbon has skyrocketed in popularity, and everyone digs the cool old-timey bottle design that enhances that pre-Civil War ethos. The glorious liquid inside that bottle makes the bottle shine like an amber jewel. It's not a darker caramel color, but almost like a golden honey color. Its mash bill shows it as a very rye-heavy bourbon with a mix of 68% corn, 28% rye, and 4% malted barley. It's a 90 proof bourbon, so the alcohol doesn't overtake the flavors like happens with some of the higher alcohol bourbons. The nose of the Bulleit Bourbon leans on the sweet side, but that makes sense given the high rye content. I tend to find the nose to suggest vanilla and honey, but it's the oak that dominates, but not like a smoky oak, more like a rich lumber oak. As to the taste, I find the taste highlights that rye sweetness, but there's also a heaviness to the bourbon, not in an off-putting way, but you got to be ready to bite the bullet. In fact, when I first encountered Bulleit, I was surprised at how popular it was because it doesn't have that totally smooth, sweet taste that most drinkers prefer. It's mellow, sure, but even thin at points in the palate spectrum. But there's something in it, particularly toward the end of the drink, that reminds you that there's a frontier roughness still in this recipe. I tend to think of that roughness not as an alcohol burn, but as a kind of peppery spiciness that hits and then lingers throughout the taste. I kind of want the flavor to end with an emphasis on the rye, like a hint of sweet fruit, but it never really emerges. Ultimately, I guess that the bourbon's popularity comes from its lack of complexity. It's a pretty straightforward rye-heavy bourbon with nothing notable. Don't get me wrong, it's a suitable bourbon, and it looks good on the shelf, and it's pleasant. I drink it often. So my recommendation is that you pick up a bottle or two, and it's pretty reasonable at about $30 a bottle. And when your bourbon neophyte friends come over, pull it down and tell them it's a great pre-Civil War heritage bourbon, and tell them it's a fine bourbon. I also think it makes not a half bad old fashioned, and that mixing it will add some of the sweet that the Bulleit lacks in the end. So that's it for the Bourbon Break for this week. But before we get back on the water, and as a final note and my regular disclaimer, as always, please keep in mind that the Fishing Professor Bourbon Break reviews are not sponsored. The distillers have not sent me samples, nor do they influence my reviews at all, though, as always, I am open to sponsorship, bribery, and extortion. The bourbons I review are purchased out of pocket, and my reviews are based on the keen sense of bourbon know-how that I have developed over many years in many of this country's finest watering holes, drinking establishments, dives, pubs, honky-tonks, and back alley speakeasies. Speaking of, let me give a quick shout out to the Hub in Tampa, Florida. And for those of you who know the Hub, you know that this was no amateur's bar. Hell, I think the barkeep would just wring out the bar towel in your glass and you'd have a 10-ounce of drunk sitting in front of you already. All a great way to drown your misery after a day of getting skunked on Tampa Bay. So remember that pain makes you stronger, tears make you braver, heartbreak makes you wiser, and whiskey makes you not remember any of that crap. As always, if you've got comments about this week's Bourbon Break, feel free to email me at sid@inventivefishing.com. And that's that. Now let's get back to the fishing. Well, that brings us to the end of another episode of the Fishing Professor Show. I want to thank Eric Bachnik of MirrOLure for joining me in the Inshore Offshore Digital Studio. You can check out all of the great MirrOLure lures, as well as Paul Brown lures, island lures, drone spoons, tidal surge lures, and a bunch of other great stuff at shopmirrolure.com. Now, before we say goodbye, I do have a message for our brothers and sisters out there behind the line. The hook is on the line. I say again, the hook is on the line. And that brings us to the end of another Fishing Professor Show. Thanks for listening, and be sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a single damn episode. And we've got a great new episode in the works for next week, so mark your calendars and set your alarms so you don't sleep through it. As always, please be sure to share the Fishing Professor Show with your fishing pals and all of those other people who don't fish and yet you manage to tolerate them anyway. As always, too, if you have a comment or a question about anything on this week's show or have recommendations for future top 10s, bourbon breaks, interviews, or information about specific products, please feel free to email me at sid@inventivefishing.com. Be sure to check out the Inventive Fishing web pages and be sure to follow us on Twitter and friend us on Facebook at Inventive Fishing. I'll be back next week with another episode. And until then, this is Sid Dobrin, the Fishing Professor. Fish on.
The Fishing Professor Show is copyrighted by Inventive Fishing, LLC. Any rebroadcast of the podcast without the consent from Inventive Fishing, LLC is strictly prohibited. Fish on!